Okay, so let's get started. Once again, I want to say thank you for joining us today and welcome to the ABCs of Subsidies. What do all the letters mean? This is the second webinar in the ATD Fourth World Series, USA series In the Know. We are very pleased that you're sharing your time with us today. And as I said, if you haven't done so already, please share where you're joining from and introduce yourself in the chat while I introduce myself. My name is Marianne Broxton, and I'm the Director of U.S. Policy and Advocacy for ATD Fourth World USA, joining today from Boston. In the Know is a new bi-monthly webinar series that looks at the history and policies surrounding topics that intersect with poverty in a non-policy wonk way that creates better understanding for everyone. I wanted to just put a little note here. Please note that when we say subsidy, when we are talking about need-based cash assistance opposed to benefits, because language is important. The word benefit sometimes implies that you're getting something extra, which adds to the already negative rhetoric and stigma surrounding cash assistance for people with low incomes. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Today, we're going to focus on SS, TANF, SNAP, and WIC. And I purposely said it that way because it can be hard to understand the alphabet soup of acronyms when it comes to subsidies. And it's even harder for people trying to navigate the safety net system. Today, we'll explain what the acronyms stand for, a little history of the policy, who qualifies, and most importantly, who has been excluded and why. First, we'll start where it all began with Social Security, SSDI, SSI, and the creation of the social safety net and means tested cash assistance. We'll look at how the idea of the deserving poor shaped AFDC, PROWAWA, and TANF. We'll talk about the program helping people put food on the table. And as we explore these programs, we would be remiss if we didn't also talk about the role racism has and continues to play, and who has access to and who is purposely excluded from these subsidies. And since beauty is in the eye of the beholder, we'll look at the Big Beautiful Bill, or HR1, its formal name, to see how regulations have made these subsidies more restrictive and harder for people to access. Then I am beyond delighted to say that we will be joined by special guest Rebecca Vallas, CEO of the National Academy for Social Insurance, for our conversation. Rebecca brings 2 decades of experience shaping economic policy, both federal and state, legal advocacy, and narrative strategy. She was a senior fellow at the Century Foundation and launched a national bipartisan campaign to modernize SSI's outdated assets limits. I will share more about Rebecca before introducing her, but for now, let's get started, shall we? As we did in our last webinar, I want to start right off by testing your knowledge with a question. Can we please show everyone's beautiful faces, if possible? I know Susie said that we had wasn't able to see everybody's faces, but that's okay as long as we can make sure that everybody can answer.
Yeah, I think if everyone goes ahead and
So for
turns on their
anyone
video.
joining us, beautiful. Okay. So for anyone joining us for the first time, don't be nervous. This is just to see a baseline of people's knowledge. We're all here because we want to learn together. So the question is, does anyone know who the WIC or WIC program covers? And I'll give you a little hint. It's in the full name of the program. Now, you can write the answers in the Q&A box, or just feel free to say it out loud. And I will be checking the Q&A box. Nelia says she doesn't have the option to turn on her camera.
Yeah, I'm jumping in here. It's Monica. This format, the webinar format, doesn't allow for participant to turn on their camera and mic.
Okay.
So they should just write in the
Yes.
Q&A box.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica. And I see answers coming up. I see women, infants, and children, women and children, women and infants, women, infants, and children. Oh my God, I love an informed audience. Very good. Give yourself a round of applause. So, since we did so well with that one, we're going to stop. One more question before we get started. Does anyone know what the S in SNAP stands for? And again, please put the answer in the Q&A box. And the question one more time is, does anyone know what the S in SNAP stands for? I see answers coming up. Supplemental, supplemental, supplemental. Very good. Diana, Deidre, Nelia, Donna, Gail, Hyacinth. Everybody's doing great on this question. I love it. Alicia, Iman, very good. I love an informed audience. So wonderful. Okay, if we can go back to slide 3, please. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So today, when a child is born in the United States, parents apply for a Social Security card or number that stays with the child for the rest of their life. This number is how federal and state employment taxes are collected, but also how payments such as retirement, disability, SSDI, or Social Security disability insurance, cash assistance for low-income seniors, SSI, or supplemental security income, and death and survivor payments are distributed, but that wasn't always the case. The Social Security program was born out of the Great Depression. Widespread job loss led to deep poverty, leaving masses of people, particularly elderly, destitute. As part of the New Deal, Social Security was meant to create a reliable source of income for retirees, with President Roosevelt describing it as a cornerstone in structure, which is being built, but is by no means complete. The real hero in this photo is a smartly dressed woman in the background, Frances Perkins, the then Secretary of Labor. As chair of the Committee on Economic Security, Perkins lobbied for labor unions in the business for support of the program, believed the program should be funded by payroll contributions to protect it from future cuts, and drafted the legislation. Next slide, please. So a fun fact, Ida Mae Fuller received the very first Social Security check on January 31st, 1940. The age a person claims Social Security and the amount of lifetime earnings determines the amount they receive. For example, at age 62, the average monthly payment is $1,424. At 65, 1,607. And at 70, the maximum delayed credit is $2,275. Ida paid into Social Security for 3 years, a total of $24 before retiring at age 65. She went on to live a long and hopefully happy life before passing at 100 years old. During her lifetime, she collected a total of $22,888.92 in Social Security. Now, some people may think Ida's return on investment is unfair somehow because of the amount she contributed. But that's the point of Social Security and social insurance programs like it. It's a promise. We all pay into the pool of money with the promise that when we need it, and regardless of how long we need it for or how much we paid into it, it will be there for us or for our children if anything happens to us. And this brings me to solvency. You may have heard talk about Social Security insolvency or running out of money and not being able to continue to make payments. The recent Social Security Administration's trustee report has set that date for 2032 for a host of conditions, provided that conditions stay as they currently are right now. The National Academy of Social Insurance recently conducted a webinar on the topic, explaining more about that report, and you can find the link in the recording. If you can't see it in the chat right now, we will put it in the Q&A box, but also don't worry about that because we will be sending out a syllabus at the end of this webinar, and it will have all of the links there so you can go back to the recording, go back to some of the other links that we will be sharing. So, just a couple of notes about eligibility. Permanent residents, foreign workers with valid visas, foreign students with employment authorization, refugees, asylees, people with DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, are also eligible for Social Security cards and numbers. People receiving SSI, Supplemental Social Security Income, the means testing program for low-income seniors, can only work a certain number of hours a week or risk losing their subsidy entirely. And they can't have more than 2,000 in savings or assets, or they could also lose their subsidies entirely. So, one more quiz. Are we ready? We're going to ask, since we're talking about the ABCs of subsidies, does anyone know what the letters A, D, C stand for when we talk about need-based cash assistance? And I'll give you a hint. It was part of the New Deal and was the precursor to AFDC and TANF. And again, please put your answers into the Q&A box. So I'll say it one more time. Does anyone know what ADC stands for when talking about need-based cash assistance? It was a precursor for AFDC and TANF. And we're going to look at the answers here from everybody. Aid to dependent children, aid to dependent children, aid to dependent. So Donna, Susie, Diana, Janet, wonderful. Usually when I do this in person, I have candy and I pass out candy to people with the right answers. So we're just going to give you some clapping for now. Good job. So if we can go to slide 5, please. Wonderful. The idea of the deserving and undeserving poor has shaped cash assistance policies in the U.S. since their creation. ADC, or Aid to Dependent Children, was created as part of the New Deal to provide a mother's pension, cash assistance to children of widows, children whose parents were disabled due to physical or mental health, or from abandonment. There was also sometimes blatant, sometimes covert, depending on who was doing it, subjective criteria. A mother must have been deemed of good moral character and fit to raise children. Children of mothers who were divorced or never married were explicitly left out. AFDC, or Aids to Families with Dependent Children, grew out of ADC program. In 1962, ADC was expanded to include parents or caregivers, usually grandparents, but also other extended family member caregivers. AFDC was means tested program, meaning recipients had to demonstrate economic need, and like ADC, there was also a good moral character component. That included compulsory social worker visits and surprise home inspections at all hours in the day and night to see if mothers were hiding a man in the house. It wasn't uncommon for social workers to question recipients or their neighbors about the recipient's sexual activity and assumed promiscuity. So that's fun, right? When we talk about who's deserving and how we become invasive in policy. In 1994, 9.6 million children and 4.6 million adults receive a cash assistance through AFDC. The popular belief at the time was that AFDC created dependency, dissuaded work and two-parent families, and was costing too much money. As part of his 1992 presidential campaign, Bill Clinton promised to end welfare as we know it. In 1996, he signed PROAWA, the Personal Responsibility and Opportunity Reconciliation Act, into law, turning AFDC into TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. TANF funding was issued to states as block grants that included incentives for states to lower the number of people receiving assistance, meaning whatever money a state didn't spend distributing as TANF subsidies to people, they got to keep and use elsewhere. TANF instituted a 5-year lifetime limit and mandatory work requirements. It also created a 5-year waiting period for legal immigrants applying to federal means tested programs, meaning Medicaid, SNAP, and SSI. Although Pro Hour was hailed as a success shortly after its passing, the real effects were seen years later. By flooding the workforce with unskilled workers, it had created an employer's market, meaning lower wages for everyone else. Even though it was meant as a means to save money, it created extra added expenses for states by needing to hire more people to do tracking and verification. And it also increased the number of families and children living in deep poverty. While the overall U.S. poverty rate was 14.8 in 2014, for women-headed households, it was 39.8%. For households headed by Black women, it was 45.6%. That's the overall poverty rate. In Arizona that same year, for every 100 low-income families with children, only 8 families received assistance. So now we're going to talk a little bit about SNAP. The food stamp program originated during the Great Depression as a way to support farmers who couldn't sell their crops during economic collapse. When the practice of paying farmers to destroy their crops and livestock enraged a hungry populace, you can see why, and directly purchasing and distributing food began to hurt struggling business owners, the Federal Surplus Commodities Corporation, or the FSCC, devised a plan of food stamps. People could purchase orange stamps for $1 and receive an additional 50-cent blue stamp, increasing purchasing power by 50%. This program was eliminated in 1943 due to World War II. The program was brought back and revived as part of the War on Poverty, with President Lyndon Johnson signing the Food Stamp Act in 1964. In 1977, the Food Stamp Reform Act ended with the requirement of purchasing food stamp coupons. And in the 1990s, EBT, our electronic benefits transfer cards, replaced paper stamps. In November, we'll focus on everything SNAP as part of our webinar series, but I want to touch upon some misconceptions about SNAPs here for everyone for a moment. A majority of the recipients are white. A majority are employed, but not earning enough money to feed their families of themselves. The remaining recipients are people who can't work, meaning children, disabled, and elderly. The average amount provided that you qualify for the full amount is $6 per person per day. Several active duty service members' families rely on SNAP, but many more don't qualify because of the basic allowance for housing they receive as military personnel counts as income, making them turn to food banks to fill in the gap. The SNAP fraud rate is actually about 1%. Currently, the biggest perpetrators of fraud are skimmers, meaning people who steal SNAP allotments from EBT cards with electronic skimming machines. Congress has ended the replacement of stolen SNAP allotments taking place after December 20th, 2024. And although chips have been added to the cards to prevent skimming, it still happens. Excuse me. WIC, Women, Infant, and Children program was created as a 2-year pilot program in 1972 as an amendment to the Child Nutrition Act of 1966 to prevent and combat malnutrition. It became a permanent program in 1975. WIC provides nutritional assistance during pregnancy, postpartum, breastfeeding support, infant formula, and specific foods for children up to age 5, like milk, eggs, cheese, whole grain cereals, fruits and vegetables, and peanut butter. It is means tested, meaning participants must show proof of income level, but applicants also must meet the nutrition risk criteria by undergoing a nutritionist assessment, usually by speaking with a nutritionist and have an appointment with them. Recertification is every 6 months to a year. WIC is an incredibly popular program, and that's why I want to show you all the different state logos there. But like all need-based subsidies under the current administration, it's up for deep cuts. In June, the House passed an agriculture appropriation bill that proposed 2 million in cuts, specifically to the fruits and vegetable funding. The Senate hasn't passed a package as of yet, but a final package needs to be passed by October 1st, 2026 deadline. If these cuts stand, it would be the first time in 30 years WIC would have to turn away eligible families due to lack of funding. So next slide, please. In our last webinar, for those of you who attended, you may remember I asked you to consider the statement, it's not underrepresented, it's systemically excluded as our mantra. When it comes to cash assistance subsidies, you need to ask yourself, who is being left out and why? People of color and Black women specifically have borne the brunt of political and public indignation when it comes to need-based cash assistance from the very beginning with the New Deal. Agriculture and domestic workers, a majority of which were Black, were purposely left out of unemployment and Social Security coverage. During harvesting season in the South, mothers, specifically Black mothers, were cut off subsidies under the employable mother rule, regardless if work was actually available or if they could even obtain it. And although false, it's a widespread common belief that mothers receive cash assistance subsidies deliberately have more children in order to increase the amount that they receive. You'll recall me telling you about surprise social worker visits and assumed promiscuity. This belief itself made U.S. Senator Russell Long, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, feel safe in referring to a group of mothers lobbying the committee as brood mares. It's also the reason for sterilization of low-income Black women without their informed consent became so prevalent in the South that it gained the horrible nickname of the Mississippi appendectomy. In the early 90s, some states offered cash assistance, usually about an extra $35 a month, for mothers on TANF to use Norplant, the birth control implant that lasted for up to about 5 years, or Depo-Provera, a quarterly birth control shot, so like every 3 months. Supporters denied that this was coercion, but I'll let you decide. If you're a mother of 3, struggling to get by on $170 a month, the actual amount of the TANF subsidy in Mississippi in the 1990s, what would you do? You know, some states instituted what has been nicknamed a family cap or baby cap, meaning any family who had another child after receiving TANF would not receive additional income to help provide for that child. My state, Massachusetts, had a baby cap that lasted for 28 years. During that time, families and children were pushed into deep poverty. So, Hunger in America is the 1968 CBS documentary that shocked Americans by viewing it. But by 1976, an electorate struggling to get by under recession recovery and high unemployment rates easily bought into Ronald Reagan's blatant racially charged tales of welfare queens and strapping young bucks, the actual quote, buying T-bone steaks with food stamps. And we'll put the link to that in the documentary in the chat, but it'll also be on the syllabus afterwards. I do want to warn you, though, that it is very graphic and disturbing, but usually the reality of poverty and hunger often is. So, in 1976, the New Republic magazine published this photo that you see here on the cover of their magazine with the statement, "Sign the welfare bill now." Once again, using the image of Black woman as the embodiment of irresponsible motherhood and a drain on society. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I want to take this moment to share this short video with you. It's 2 minutes and 27 seconds, but it is well worth our time of watching. Colin, could you please play the video?
In 1976, when Ronald Reagan pursued the Republican presidential nomination, he repeatedly told the story of an African-American woman named Linda Taylor, claiming she was earning more than $150,000
Colin, we lost sound.
a year by cheating social services, holding her up as an example of liberal policies gone wrong.
Well, compared to some of you white people, I think I've done pretty damn good to be black.
The story grabbed attention, but had little basis in reality. Taylor was a con artist and not at all representative of the typical welfare recipient.
The welfare queen image is a manufacture of Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party using only one story from Chicago in the 1970s of one woman who scammed something from the system, and it's not entirely clear all that she scammed.
There's this notion that 99% of the welfare money in this society is going to Black and Hispanics. It's wrong, it's bogus, because the majority of people on welfare are white. The majority of people on food stamps are white.
Ain't no love in the heart of the city. Ain't no love in the heart of town.
Reagan's attack on welfare marked a significant change. Since the Great Depression, the federal government had offered aid to poor people, the majority of whom were white. Now, in financially insecure times, Reagan hinted that those programs, paid for by tax dollars, were only aiding Black people, and he promised that cutting them would help fix the economy.
This is a turning point, not only in the history of Black people, but it's a turning point in the ways in which people can talk about poverty, because we've moved from this idea of the deserving poor to the undeserving poor, and there's very much a kind of emphasis upon morality and moralism and all these kinds of things that are much more invested in the idea of individual failure than asking how did we wind up with this population of impoverished people in the first place.
Can we go to the next slide, please? I want to come back to this photo once more. Now, it may be cynical of me, but I don't think the fact that President Bill Clinton is flanked by two Black women while signing Pro-Wawa into law is coincidence. The woman in white is Penelope Howard. The woman in green is Lily Hardin, a single mother who is touted at the signing as a former welfare recipient. Hardin participated in a welfare work program instituted by Clinton as governor of Arkansas. Of it, she stated, "Going to work gave me independence to take care of my children and to make sure there was always food on the table and a roof over our heads." In 2002, Hillary Clinton said a former AFDC recipients in support of Pro-Hour, they're no longer deadbeats. They're actually out there being productive. That same year, 2002, Lily Hardin had a stroke and was denied Medicaid coverage, which she previously had under AFDC and couldn't afford prescriptions due to the cliff effect. So cliff effect is when you make too much money to qualify for subsidies, but not enough money to afford market rate health insurance or anything else really. Hardin died in 2014 at the age of 59. And this brings us to Johnny Tillman. As a divorced single mother of 6, Johnny Tillman turned to AFDC when she became sick and couldn't work. The group she created among mothers in her public housing development to push back against treatment they received on AFDC eventually grew into the NWRO, the National Rights Organization, where she served as executive director from 1972 to 1974. In 1972, her essay, Welfare is a Woman's Issue, was published in Ms. Magazine. In it, Tillman said, I'm a woman. I'm a Black woman. I'm a poor woman. I'm a fat woman. I'm a middle-aged woman, and I'm on welfare. In this country, if you're any one of those things, you count less as a human being. If you're all those things, you don't count at all, except as a statistic. And that link to the full essay will be in the syllabus for you to read it afterwards if you like. And I recommend that you do. It can be argued that Lily Hardin is an isolated story, but there is mountains of data showing that after Pearl Harbor, the poverty population, meaning the number of people who were previously qualified for the subsidy but do not receive it, as we mentioned about in Arizona, increased. In the video that we just watched, Dr. Jelani Cobb stated, people became much more invested in the idea of individual failure than asking, how did we wind up with this population of impoverished people in the first place? And if you want to learn more about how families experienced extreme poverty after Pearl Harbor, I recommend the book, $2 a Day, Living on Almost Nothing in America, and that will also be included in the syllabus. So this brings us to HR 1. Some people may know it as the Big Beautiful Bill. If we can go to the next slide, please. HR 1 is the Budget Reconciliation Law, or the Big Beautiful Bill, that cuts 3.5 trillion, with a T, 3.5 trillion from the federal budget over the next 10 years. Although Social Security checks are untouched, there's almost 1 trillion in federal funding cuts to Medicaid over 10 years, stricter eligibility rules, work or community engagement, the title they're using that for that, requirements. So work requirements as community engagement, and more frequent income eligibility recertifications. Even though HR1 institutes work requirements, work readiness and training programs aren't fully funded. So meaning, how do people find a job without having programs to help them do so if they've never worked before? There's also 187 billion with a B in SNAP cuts. This is something new for SNAP. Lifetime time limits are imposed to SNAP and work requirements. Between July 2025, when HR1 was first signed, and April 2026, SNAP participation fell by 11% nationwide, meaning 4.5 million people are currently struggling to put food on the table. At the opposite end of the spectrum, HR1 includes roughly 4.5 trillion in total tax cuts, predominantly benefiting corporations and the richest 10% of Americans. The top 1% will receive a tax cut of over $60,000. So $60,000, that's the same amount 62% of workers or over 10 million people earned in 1 year. So our new mantra for this webinar is every statistic of a person struggling to get by is tied to a policy choice. So now it is my pleasure and to introduce to you Rebecca Vallas, our special guest for today. Rebecca Vallas is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Academy of Social Insurance. Rebecca brings 2 decades of experience shaping economic policy with a career that spans federal and state policy, legal advocacy, narrative strategy. Most recently, she was a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, where she founded the organization's disability economic justice work and launched a national bipartisan campaign to modernize SSI's outdated asset limits. Rebecca is a former legal aid attorney and previously held leadership roles at the Center for American Progress, where she oversaw the organization's anti-poverty work and originated its disability work. the National Organization of Social Security's claimants representatives. And if that isn't enough, in her personal practice, she is a trained astrologer, energy healer, and spiritual coach. When she isn't in Washington, D.C., she spends her time on her farm in Charlottesville, Virginia, with her husband and 4 rescue cats. Rebecca, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's wonderful seeing you again today.
It's wonderful to see you, Marianne. And that was just an extraordinary walk through history that you just walked us through. I mean, oh my God. And please share the syllabus with me. I can't wait to see it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I that really touches me that you said that. Thank you so much. I want to jump right in and say that a few years ago, I saw this quote from you, and it really stayed with me. And you said, "It is long past time we move beyond cutting poverty as our North Star goal. America's poverty measure itself is so broken that by starting at that frame, we're only limiting ourselves to tinkering at the margins. But we can't just tear down systems of oppression, nor is only talking about what we want to tear down going to get us there. It's on us proactively to vision forward what we want to build in our place." So, knowing the current political climate that we're facing, how do we vision forward to a people-centered social contract that's based in dignity and equity, opposed to oppression and restriction? And, if how do we do it as people if our policymakers aren't able to?
Yeah, I love that question, and I love you starting there. And also, I have to say, Marianne, I love so much that you wove Frances Perkins into your walkthrough of history, right? Because I feel like that's the medicine we all need right now. Is like if you don't know Frances Perkins, if you're learning about her today from Marianne's extraordinary slideshow, go check her out, because that's the kind of energy we need to be tapping into right now. Frances Perkins wasn't sitting on Easy Street going, what might we do with our lives, right? It was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. It was it was people leaping to their deaths. That was her big moment of awakening, followed by some of the worst economic conditions the country has ever seen. And that was what caused her to say, wait a second, maybe it doesn't have to be this way. Maybe the thing that we need is some radical imagination. And there's actually a Frances Perkins quote that I was looking at yesterday because of something that's actually related to astrology. Frances Perkins, she talked about the work she did birthing the New Deal as weaving the torn fabric of a failing democracy into a new design for government, right? And that's the moment we're in right now, right? It's not like it's puppies and kittens out there, right? But it's moments of crisis that are moments of opportunity for really big paradigm shifts. And that's what time it is on the clock of the world right now. And so there's some words I'm going to bring in from a poet and activist that I spent a lot of time thinking about. Sonia Renee Taylor, another person worth checking out if anyone doesn't know her. She wrote a book that's very big in the disability community called The Body Is Not an Apology. Sonia Renee Taylor said during the COVID pandemic, which feels like lifetimes ago, but was, not that long ago, just a few years ago, everybody was talking about, oh, when are we going to return to normal? And she said, that's not the move. Yeah. She said, normal never was, except that it normalized greed and inequity and exhaustion and hatred and depletion and lack and hoarding. And here's the line that I feel like was such a message to people who care about social insurance, and you call it subsidies, which I love. She said, we are being invited to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. And I feel like that's the assignment for us right now, right? It's not about what's politically possible within 2 years, right? The big question is, what does it look like to stand in the future and pull the present towards it right now, right? That's the move. And that starts with radical imagination, which is what I think Frances Perkins, who's on the wall next to me, kind of wants to be here, is saying, like, that's what we all got to do.
I love all the quotes, and especially the idea is, what is normal? Normal for who? Like who was doing good before? Not everybody was. So like normal is different for everybody, and that we need to take that into account, because mutuality, that
Yeah.
like we're not doing good unless the person next to us is doing good and the person next to them is doing it. We all need to take care of each other. And I love the metaphor of the quilt and how can we make it
Yeah.
that we all are embraced by that, taken care of by
Right.
that. And I
Yeah.
love that you gave us an name of a new book that we'll write that down and we'll include that in the syllabus too at the end. Um, so I want to talk about, I know in your work you focused a lot on narrative change, and at ATD Fourth World, one of the things that we try to focus on is changing the narrator through direct participation of people directly impacted by poverty. So knowing that statistically, 1 in 4 20-year-olds will experience long-term disability before retirement. That a little bit more than that, 1 in 4, or about 20%, 7% of people are living with the disability. I'm included in that. And by age 75, 58% of people have some experience of poverty. How can we get people who may be struggling to get by themselves to reject the false narratives around need-based cash assistance, subsidies like SSI, like SNAP, or any of the other subsidies that are out there?
Yeah, I love that question as well. And also, I feel like the answer is sort of embedded in how you ask the question, because I know you know the answer, which is we've got to tell different stories, and who tells the stories matters, right? I think about the moment we're in. I'm talking about what time it is on the clock of the world. I think that's kind of where we have to start, is understanding where we are in time. We're in a battle of imaginations right now, right? That's where we are. We've got one story being told about what the future of this country could be, and it's on us to tell a different story, right? That is one that actually makes possible the future that we are trying to build. And part of why stories are so important. It's sometimes said that humans are storied beings. That's how we make sense of the world around us. Well, I think of policies and laws and institutions and programs like the ones you were just walking through as snapshots of consciousness frozen in time. That's what they are, and that's how they come to be. Policy doesn't emerge from nowhere, right? It comes from the stories we tell, and that's what shapes collective consciousness. And that's what shapes what we believe is possible. Some of the most damaging stories that we've ever told or allowed to continue to be told are that there are those people over there who need some kind of assistance. And then there's these other good people who are the deserving people, right? And of course, that's deeply intertwined with another deeply damaging and deeply American story, which is that a human being's worth comes from their work, right? And the truth is, we all know this. And if anyone is listening to this and is part of your community, we all know this. Economic vulnerability and interdependence are core parts of the human condition. All of us will experience periods in our lives where we depend on other people, when we depend on systems, whether that's disability, that's my life too, illness, caregiving, aging, larger structural economic conditions and market failures, or just being human, right? All of us are going to experience those types of life experiences. The question isn't whether we need each other, it's what kind of society do we want to live in when we do? And that's another reason why I think it's so wonderful that you were telling the story of Social Security and Frances Perkins, because those were the kinds of questions she was forcing, right? That was the core premise at the core of the New Deal and Social Security. And somehow that story has remained woven into the fabric of Social Security in a way where people don't think of Social Security as for other people. They think of it as part of the fabric of American life. And that's because of the story that's embedded. So I think the work is, yes, it's telling stories, but it's also being really conscious of the stories we're telling and what futures they make possible, and doing it in a way that speaks to people, not about numbers, not about facts, but speaks to people in the heart, right? Instead of in the head. That's where everybody can really connect.
Yeah, I love the idea that policy is a snapshot of a picture in time. Yeah, and it shows like how we care for people. And as you said, knowing that at some point we are all going to need this, it's all in how, so how do we care? Again, coming back to how do we care for each other?
Yes.
And especially the idea of your worth being tied to a pay
Yeah.
stub when we know that there is so much unpaid work going on.
Yes.
I always like to come back to during COVID, 1 million women left the workforce because they no longer had childcare. So does that mean that they no longer had work? They were just doing unpaid work, So I really appreciate everything you had to say about that. I appreciate you taking time with us because I know that this week is the Disability Awareness Week, that July 26th to be exact marks the 36th anniversary of the passing of the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. Um, what is the one thing that you would like for people attending today to take away from all of this about need-based cash assistance
Yeah, I mean,
subsidies?
I feel like it's embedded and it's woven in how you've told the story and in how you've constructed so much of it. And so whether I say it right now or not, I think they're going to be taking it away because you did such a wonderful job in putting all of that together. And I think, that it's that again, I think people know this if they're listening, programs and policies, like all the ones that have all the acronyms that you were decoding, aren't just line items in a budget, right? They are expressions of who we believe belongs and whose lives we value, right? That's what they are. And so when we start to look at structures that we have inherited as expressions and statements, right, of our beliefs as a society, we start to approach policymaking very differently, right? And so instead of it being, well, how do we tinker or kind of society are we choosing to be? And what kind of future are we actually trying to vision? That North Star that you were talking about before. It's really tempting, especially in Washington settings. And this, I think, was what I was responding to with the quote that you mentioned from some number of years ago. It's really tempting to set measures of success that aren't actually a North Star. But if you aren't thinking about it from the standpoint of what are we actually trying to build, you can easily hem in people's imagination by saying, well, getting a certain number of people over an arbitrary line that has no resemblance to the cost of living in this country, that's success. And then what are we actually going to do? We're just going to tinker around the edges. So I think that's the big takeaway is remembering these are not policy conversations. They're actually moral and actually deeply spiritual conversations, even if we don't use those words.
Yeah.
That's where they're coming from. And being aware and connected to that deeper part of ourselves allows us to see what's underpinning what sound like conversations about dollars and cents.
Wonderful, wonderful. Um, I remember reading this article a few years ago, and I'm sorry for everybody, I forget the author's name, but the title of it was For Women on Welfare, Laughter is an Act of Defiance. And as someone who relied on need-based subsidies at one point in my life, I felt that, Um, in doing this work, living this work for a minute, like as many advocates do, or even the constant bombardment in the news every day of what is going on with cuts and new regulations to subsidies, it can be hard and it can be even deflating. So I want to ask you, what is your act of defiance to protect your well-being and keep going?
I love this question, and also I have a hard time answering it with one.
That's okay.
I mean,
That's
I'm
okay.
sort of here, visibly trying to embody the defiance that many of us need to embody by showing up as our actual selves instead of pretending to be something that we think we're supposed to be to fit into the spaces that we're infiltrating. I think what I would say, if I had to pick one, is refusing to let cynicism and narrow-mindedness masquerade as wisdom. There's a lot of spaces, especially in DC and especially in ivory towers, where people like to tell you what's possible. And to do that, it's, well, oh no, I know more than other people. I'm an expert, right? I have the PhD, I have whatever our, archetype of expert is. And I can tell you what's possible. And I think that's really problematic and destructive, especially in a moment like this, where the move isn't to try to, as Sonia Renee Taylor was urging us, return to some normal that never was, but it's actually to participate in shaping what comes next in a way that moves beyond what we've been told is possible. Frances Perkins wasn't sitting around letting people tell her what was possible. She went and showed them what was possible, right? And so I think, honestly, imagination is itself an act of defiance, as is shifting how policymaking gets made, which is a big part of what I spend my time doing here, even in an institution that has a name like the National Academy of Social Insurance. I believe it's time to update the archetype of policymaker, right? It's not the PhD expert who sits in an ivory tower thinking about some other person that is going to need the policy, right, someday. To me, the right way to do it and the new archetype that I think we all need to be contributing to popularizing and helping people understand is one it's about not one hero expert who parachutes in and has all the answers, but it's creating the conditions for the solutions to emerge. And that involves bringing together all the forms of expertise that we need to be able to have good ideas. And some of those forms of expertise might be people who have lots of policy expertise. I'm not saying kick out the person with the PhD, and the people with lived experience, the people who work in community, the people who have all the forms of expertise that around the table start to look like a more complete picture. We're always going to have better ideas and solutions emerge when that is what we understand as the process. And that threatens a lot of old guard folks who want to say, no, it's got to be done this way. But what got us here isn't going to get us there. And I think that's an act of defiance we should all share in right now, is building those kinds of tables and spaces.
I love that you say that, because what you talked about is like, no, we need a broad range of experts, whether it be people that study this, people that do the work, or people that live it. Because that's actually one of the practices that we have in ATD Fourth World. We call it merging of knowledge, where we bring together different groups to talk about a topic from their perspective, and then we merge that together. So I really love yeah, that's a way forward for people. And that's one of the things that I believe in too, the idea that people with direct experience know how policy works in actuality, opposed to how it's supposed to work in paper. And the idea of we said to people, show up, be part of it, be part of the vision of what it could look like. So we have 5 minutes left. So which is like, I see we also need to remember that. I'm gonna have time for one question in the chat, in the Q&A. So if we can put in one question in the chat. And I also want to say, if we don't get to answer your questions now, please email them to me. And I can make sure that I go back and we answers the questions afterwards. So if somebody wants to put a question in the chat for us. I don't see anything coming up. I think everybody's like, great. I think I learned.
We did it, Marianne. We did
it. So then I want to take a quick minute and ask real quick, what is the next project you're working on? Or what should people be aware about that's on the horizon?
So the project, there's a lot of things we're working on at the Academy. There's a lot of things that we're involved in behind the scenes, but I think the thing that's giving me the most life and hope and joy right now actually is a project that embodies the theory of change that you and I were just talking about what you're calling as merging, right? And what I'm thinking of as, updating this archetype of policymaker. And it's called the Benefits Future Studio. And we're doing it in tandem with the Aspen Institute, because we really believe in their ethos around person-centered policymaking, right? And that's something that we hold as well, and that I hold and believe is how we get this right. And so what the Benefits Future Studio is starting with, instead of having a bunch of the hero experts sit in a room and say, oh, what do we need for 2029, is actually a series of convenings across the country where we get out of Washington and we get DC people out of Washington and we create these spaces with all those forms of expertise. And we say, what does the future of our social contract need to look like? And how do we start with that radical imagination instead of what we've been told is possible? And then bring that back to Washington and say, great, what do we do with this? And this is what our charge is. So that's giving me a lot of life and a lot of hope right now. And anyone who's interested should reach out, because we're right now collecting names of people who want to come to those convenings.
Wonderful. I know I would love to be part of that. I'm sure everybody listening would love to be part of that, and we will reach out, definitely. I did notice one thing in the webinar. I said, what about housing? That's going to be an upcoming webinar. Where the best place to show this webinar, and that will all be included in the syllabus. So for now, I want to say thank you to all of you for sharing your time with us today. And oh my God, Rebecca, thank you so much to you for sharing your knowledge and your insight and your time with all of us. And I truly appreciate it. I know we all appreciate it, and we appreciate you. We are that much wiser for you being here, and so
I
thank you
love you
so
too.
much
You
for that.
create an amazing
You
space, and
know.
it's always a pleasure. And you know we're bringing you to some of these convenings, so I look forward to it.
Would love to. Wonderful. Just let me know. I'm there. I also want to give a shout out to Colin Moore for being our tech person behind the scenes and keeping us rolling along smoothly. So thank you so much, Colin. Great to have you today. So soon, as I said, you'll be receiving an email with the survey asking you what you thought of today's webinar, and please fill that out. And the link will be in the Colin, is there a way that you can put that link into the Q&A box so everybody can see it now? But if you can't see the link for the survey in the Q&A box, it will be part of the syllabus. It probably takes about 2 minutes to fill out, and asking you what you thought, but also asking you about what you think about topics for future webinars. So you get to have a little say in this too, like what you would like to hear in the future. Um, so I want to let you know all about some of our upcoming webinars if you would like to join us. On August 17th at 6 p.m., the Rosinski series is presenting Indigenous voices on perspectives on collective identity and voice. In September, the In the Know series will be focusing on housing. And in November, we'll be doing a deeper dive into SNAP, talk about food policing and public charge, and how that's increasing fear-induced hunger for immigrant families. And if you're unfamiliar with what public charge is, that's all the more incentive to join us and be part of that webinar. So please keep a lookout for the flyer in your inbox in the future coming up. And as we close out our discussion today on subsidies, what they do and who has been left out, I want to leave you with a quote by the late Michael Brooks: "Be ruthless with systems, be kind with people." So on that note, I want to say again, thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you for Rebecca for being here with us. We greatly appreciate it. And to everybody here, please take care, and we will join together again soon. So have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.